Thanks, Ildi, for that evolution-style game. I don't really know how to connect it to conflict and peace, but I don't think we really need to.
Conflict between the rabbits and the foxes.
Yeah.
The battle of survival.
Battle of survival, yeah. But yeah, today's topic is going to be about how to solve human conflict that we see all around us, and then what's the starting point of a peaceful world, or even a peaceful self that we're all seeking for. And I think this is important because, we're all in our own lives, doing our own things, and we might not be connected to the conflict that's going on in the world. We might not even be recognizing the conflict that's going on within ourselves. So by understanding these types of conflicts, it can be a starting point to overcoming them and, living a life free from, constant contradiction and pain. Yeah, so I like to say, human conflict has existed since the dawn of human history, and it's caused pain and suffering for every generation involved, including ours. And today, we see and experience many aspects of this conflict. And we see here world conflict, like the battles and bloodshed in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine right now. We see human conflict in the political realm between the right and left, traditional versus liberal and postmodern values. But most relatably, we see the conflict within ourselves. It's the daily struggle within our lives to be the best version of ourselves, which is, a life according to God's hope for us. And on the other hand, the worst version of ourselves, consumed by selfishness and instant gratification. Now, how do we resolve this conflict? Well, what is the opposite of conflict, first and foremost? The opposite of human conflict, it's peace, right? And from the viewpoint of Karp and also myself, peace is realized when we can all attend God, our Creator, as our heavenly parents. And when we're all doing this together, we're one family under God. And in this family, true love flows within our lives, flows within our relationships, because we see each other as brothers and sisters under heavenly parent God, the source of this true love that we're all looking for. But you might ask, Sam, how is this a reality? How can we take this theory that sounds good to something substantial in our life? That's always the question. Well, what I would say is it can be a reality when there's people who dedicate their life towards this ideal, live out these values in their own life, and we have people who follow in their footsteps. That's how peace can actually be realized. And this ideal is what our Karp founders, Reverend and Mrs. Moon, stood for all their life. Living in the time of the 40-year Japanese occupation, from 05 to 45, they were war refugees. The occupation was shortly followed up by the Korean War, which divided the country in half. You see North and South Korea now. And they had to flee from their home to South Korea. They saw firsthand the bloodshed and the pain associated with war and conflict. But despite their situation, which honestly made peace seem like impossible, or even like a foolish dream to even have, they held on to this dream of peace, one family under God, throughout their entire lives. And because of this, they created a global movement called the Unification Movement, which Karp is a part of, and which we are a part of as well. Now, Reverend and Mrs. Moon have done a lot of work throughout their entire lives for the sake of peace. One being their 40-year ministry in the U.S. A couple notable events that they had was in 1974, they met with President Nixon for the Forgive, Love, and Unite rally. This was around the time where Nixon was going to get impeached because of this Watergate suspicion that they had of him. And Reverend Moon was like a spiritual advisor to him, saying you should repent to God and seek his forgiveness and guidance for the country to move forward. And they also held, Reverend Mrs. Moon, and as well as the members, also held 40 days of prayer and some fasting in front of the Capitol Hill to show devotion for America. And Reverend Moon kept saying, like, guys, America, we are founded upon Christian values. It's our time to practice those values for President Nixon. Forgive him, love, and unite. It's the perfect time to do so. And this was all so that they could fight the rise of communistic ideals and moral decadence that was going on in America in the 70s especially. Now, have you guys ever lived in another country before? Like actually lived? You have, of course. You grew up in multiple different...
I'm originally from India, but I grew up in Singapore, Dubai.
Okay, and you came to the US for school. Yeah, and you know, when you're going to a different country, I don't know, but it may feel a little like hard to be a part of that country because you didn't grow up with it. You may not be involved in the culture, and everyone seems to have like national boundaries. Like they're only associated with people of their own nation, ethnicity. But Reverend and Mrs. Moon literally dedicated 40 years of their entire lives to a foreign country that seemingly they had no association. Like you would ask, like, why do you even care about this country if you have no one there? You have nothing to do there, it seems. But in actuality, they really felt they did. In 1976, they held a huge festival called the God Bless America Festival, and Reverend Moon spoke in the Yankee Stadium, where the New York Yankees, I think, used to play. So there were like 25,000 people there in attendance, and he gave this speech here, an excerpt. I just wanted to read it. He stood up there as a Korean man, speaking Korean with a translator, and he said, "When God's blessing is great and one forsakes God's will, God's punishment is equally great." In the early 1960s, America seemed to be the hope of the world, and the symbol of America was the city of New York. Today, however, the world has lost faith in America, and New York has become a jungle of immorality and depravity. Billy, you've co-opted in New York, so I'm sure you've seen first-hand accounts of that. It has been transformed into a city under the attack of evil. Throughout all of America, Satan is becoming the master. God has been forgotten in this country, and if forgotten, God can only leave America. Now is the very moment that this is taking place. When the unifying force of God leaves America, what will happen? Nothing will be able to hold America together. The family will break down, churches will divide, and America is mortally ill because the cells of her body are decaying. This will be the perfect opportunity for the evil of communism to overtake America, which it tried to do around this time. And he even mentions here in the second paragraph, like, there are critics who say, why is Reverend Moon so involved in America's 200-year anniversary? It's none of his business. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's an illness in your home, do you not need a doctor from outside? If your home catches on fire, do you not need firefighters from outside? He says, God sent me to America in the role of a doctor and in the role of a firefighter. That is why I have come to America. Good medicine may taste bitter, and an operation may involve some pain, but the treatment must begin at once. And this is my favorite part of this speech, because it shows how much he cared for this country, and more so a peaceful world, not just a peaceful Korea. For the last 3 years, with my entire heart and soul, I've been teaching American youth a new revelation from God. They now have a clear concept of what the God-centered family, church, and nation should look like. They also know the dark realities of America. Thus, they have become determined fighters to bring new life and salvation to America before it's too late. They know the heart of God, the grieving heart of God. They're absolutely determined to turn the tide back to God. Now, I love this speech because, Reverend Moon here, he stands up for God so earnestly in a country that was super confused at this time. I think we still are in some degree, but, he felt that his calling went beyond his own nation, his own people. It was a calling from God to bring the world towards God. Now, I just wanted to point out something interesting here. If you may be religious, maybe Christian, or even not, this might have stood out to you. He says, with my entire heart and soul, I have been teaching American youth a new revelation from God. Now, that's a big claim to say you have the new revelation. So what is this new revelation he's talking about? Well, he's talking about the divine principle, which is the core scripture of CARP and the unification movement, which he penned. And in my experience, this book is special. It's transformed my life in many ways, because through the DP, many of heaven's secrets that have been kind of hidden throughout history were revealed. Firstly, God's essence, God's true nature as a heavenly parent, both masculine and feminine qualities, was revealed through the principle. Why God even created us in the world in the first place was revealed. He wanted to experience love, and love needs a partner. And he gave us a blueprint for life, which is to experience or to go through the three great blessings: to mature, have a true family, and then spread that into the society and world. A common blueprint that he gives us. He explains the nature of the fall, why we don't see peace in the world, and what's the origin of that. How God has been working throughout human history, which is by ultimately sending Jesus. Talked about the essence of Jesus as the only begotten Son. The only begotten Son essentially is the person who has no association with conflict or the fall in the beginning. This person is united with God and totally good. This is why Jesus is revered in Christianity, because he's completely good. He also revealed God's hope for Jesus, which was to become the true father of all mankind, meaning assuming the position of parent with an only begotten daughter, because if there's God's son, there should be God's daughter, right? And together, they're true parents that usher in the era of peace with their example, their love. Pretty self-explanatory. But we know that due to the disbelief of the people 2,000 years ago, Jesus actually had to go the way of the cross. And today is a day to remember that, Good Friday. Actually, I was walking to the gym an hour or two ago, and I was just going to get a quick workout in. But in the middle of my walk, I seen a bunch of people kneeling in front of the Krensman quad. I was like, what's going on? And in front of where they're kneeling was a cross. And I realized they were doing a Catholic celebration or ritual during Good Friday. So I just decided to kneel there with them and say their prayers to remember Jesus. And this is why my khakis are a little dirty and kneeling on the floor on the brick. But anyway, the reason why they're kneeling and they're worshiping and praising Jesus is because the love that he gave throughout his life and even the death on his cross was the spark of Christianity, which eventually became the greatest, the largest movement in history. Does everyone here know a Christian in their life? Someone who identifies as Christian? I would say so, right? Because it's amazing what one man, Jesus Christ, did for this whole world and what it's become. And lastly, VP reveals Jesus' promised return. He said he will come back, and this is Christian history's hope. People are waiting for Christ to come back and usher in this era of peace, the kingdom of heaven. And he said he'll do so by holding the marriage supper of the Lamb. We, as CARP, interpret this as the second advent, Jesus' second coming, and the only begotten daughter will become the true parents together as a couple. I just wanted to quickly talk about my experience with the principle. Who's ever studied the principle before? It's okay if you haven't, but you can raise your hand. If you haven't, I definitely really recommend it. For me, it's provided me a deeper understanding of God as my heavenly parent, not just someone or something out in the sky, but developing a personal connection. It's given me a strong purpose in my life. To be the best version of myself each day and offer this version to the betterment of the world for God and for every person, past, present, and future. It's also encouraged me to take the most responsibility I can for God. And Jordan Peterson, have you guys ever heard of Jordan Peterson? By the way, some of us bought tickets for Jordan Peterson's talk that's happening in June. He's going to be in Fenway, be talking about his new book. Anyway, I love Jordan Peterson, but one thing he says is, it's in responsibility that most people find the meaning that sustains them through life. It's not in happiness, it's not in impulsive pleasures, it's in responsibility that people find purpose. Now, when I read that quote, I kind of think of like a parent, like a father per se. We're all men, and maybe we all hope to be fathers one day. But what is a father's purpose? Their purpose is to fulfill their responsibility as a father, to raise their kids, for them to provide for them, and raise them so they can be good men and women in the future. Now, the degree of responsibility you take in your life correlates directly to the degree of purpose you'll feel. The more responsibility you take, the more purpose you'll naturally feel in life, more motivated you feel. So, doesn't that mean a worldview or a belief framework that motivates you to take the most responsibility for God is the most optimal worldview? Doesn't that make sense? The divine principle and the belief system that it offers has inspired me to take the most responsibility, thus giving me the most purpose. Now, just a disclaimer, I haven't studied every worldview in human history. I think that's impossible for one person to do. But from my studies and my experience, this is just, what I think. Now, Reverend and Mrs. Moon's responsibility that they thought was to love all mankind for God. And this seems like a humongous responsibility to take, right? Probably one of the biggest you can. Reverend and Mrs. Moon, during the 1990s, visited the Soviet Union during their anti-communist rallies. You know, from Luke's talk last time, how devastating communism was, how many people it's killed, how many people have suffered under it. And they met the former Soviet Union President Mikhail Gorbachev, and they served as advisors for him. And soon after, they also met Kim Il-sung, the former dictator of North Korea. Now, Reverend Moon actually gave an account of his experience with Kim Il-sung and the things leading prior to that. For some context, Reverend Moon was imprisoned numerous times because of Kim Il-sung for being a religious leader, for being anti-communist. He was almost killed numerous times in a death camp in North Korea. So, he says here, "My last visit to North Korea was a historical opportunity. I returned to my hometown for the very first time after 40 years. There is no one who is more justified to hold animosity towards North Korea than I. I was severely persecuted because I was a religious leader and strong anti-communist. I was tortured. I was put in the forced labor camps in Hunan, North Korea, for nearly 3 years. I witnessed so many innocent prisoners perish with my own eyes there. It's a miracle of miracles that I'm alive today. I'm here only because of God's special grace and protection. The essence of true love is to love people who are unlovable. I went back to North Korea, not as the enemy's home, but I went there as if I was visiting my beloved brother's home, my homeland. Carrying the principle that sustained me throughout my life, forgive, loving, and unite. In my heart, I traveled to North Korea." So for context, before going to North Korea, Reverend and Mrs. Moon went to Hawaii for a couple weeks to pray and kind of shed all their resentment and even maybe like strong dislike, hatred towards what Kim Il-sung did for them and their people and their families, so that they could come and meet him as a brother and a sister instead of as enemies. And you can see here in this picture, Reverend Moon embracing. You'll see a video later, Reverend Moon goes and hugs Kim Il-sung. And Kim Il-sung is surprised, you'll see. Like, oh, I didn't expect someone who I almost killed to hug me like this. Now, how do we know that Reverend and Mrs. Moon are chosen by God, though? There are a lot of great people in life, but how do we know they're chosen by God directly? It's a good question. What did Jesus say? He said in Matthew, "Therefore, by their fruits you will know them." Fruits meaning the actions that you produce from your life. You can say you're a good person, but if your actions don't line up, you have bad fruit. Jesus says, good fruit will produce a good tree will produce good fruit. Bad tree will produce bad fruit. So in the same way, a great person, a person chosen by God, will produce fruit or results, actions that are conducive to that goodness. Next, how are they chosen people? How could they be someone that God entrusts a huge mission to? Well, let's look at what Jesus says about his second coming when he comes back. He says the second coming will not only be seen by the fruits, But the second coming will be able to open a scroll, like a seal with 7 seals. In Revelations, it says here, Revelation is essentially like a revelation that one of the disciples, early disciples, experienced directly from an angel. And he says here, John says, I saw a mighty angel proclaim in a loud voice, who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll? No one in heaven or earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside. John, he cried and cried because no one was worthy to open the scroll. And one of the elders said to me, do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals. So what is the Lion? Who is the Lion of the tribe of Judah and the root of David? It's Jesus, or essentially the Messiah. So what is the scroll? What does that symbolize? It's the expression, the newest expression of truth. It's the scriptures, the ideas that open the door to a deeper understanding of God and humankind. So we will know that the expression of truth comes by revelation, not just from us trying to think things through with our intellect and reason. It will only come by revelation. And the divine principle is exactly that. It's the scroll that's written here in Revelations. It's the expression of truth that opens the door to a deeper relationship with God. Oh, I didn't even explain the pictures here that are in my head. I loved this movie here. It's the movie of King Arthur, the cartoon. And in this cartoon, in the story in general, there's this sword named Excalibur, and there's a prophecy around it saying the one who lifts up this sword from stone will be the chosen one, will be the king. Everyone tries, people on steroids, you can imagine, like gym sharks going to the gym every single day. They could not lift up the sword. But this one young boy probably has never been to the gym in his life. He was able to uplift the sword and wield Excalibur, and he ended up being King Arthur. So in the same way, the chosen person will be revealed by what they can do. Lifting up the sword, or in the other ways, opening the scroll. It's a new expression. And the person who was able to reveal that was Reverend Moon. So Reverend Moon received the mission of the Second Advent when on the Easter week of 1936, he was praying tearfully on a mountain, Mount Myeodu in North Korea, when he was just a young boy. And at this time, he saw war, he was in the midst of the Japanese occupation, and he was crying every night to God, like, why do people suffer? Why do my people suffer, and how can we resolve this? And God saw his sincere heart. And Jesus appeared to him on that day and gave him a mission, told him to complete the mission that he left unfinished, which was to become the true parents and usher in the era of peace. Because his mission was to become the true father, he also had to find the one and only begotten daughter, who was born as God's daughter. And that's Mrs. Moon. She was born from a fervent Christian lineage of 3 only daughters, successively. And ever since she was a child, she had a very deep connection with God because of her Christian roots, but also the mission that God called upon her to accomplish. So she accepted her calling to become the true mother, which is to embrace all mankind with motherly love. And since the passing of Reverend Moon in 2012, she's poured out her heart and soul to found countless peace organizations to further their dream of a peaceful world under God, our Heavenly Parent. And in 1960, they conducted their holy wedding, which was the fulfillment of the marriage supper of the Lamb, which Jesus prophesied about in his second coming. And from this day on, they stood in the position of true parents, which is a parental position to love all mankind on behalf of God, the mission that they felt that they were supposed to take on. Now, that might have just ruffled some feathers. Whether it's in here or it's through the live stream, especially if you have a Christian background. Like Christ's second advent is so precious, and Jesus even says, be careful, because there will be false witnesses that will come saying, I'm the person, I'm the chosen person. So Jesus says, be watchful of those false witnesses, but also keep an eye open for the right person, the chosen one. Now, what I will say to you guys that might be thinking that, which is completely okay, is to be sensitive to what God is showing you. I think that will be what I'll try to do if I were listening to this right now. Let's take an example of Jesus at his time, when he said the same exact thing, I'm the chosen person. What happened? He was crucified, he was persecuted, humiliated, and crucified on the cross. While he was on the cross, Roman soldiers would come up to him and spit at him, mock him. They even said here, come down from the cross if you say you're the Son of God. You say you saved others, but you can't even save yourself. Come down from the cross if you're God's chosen person. Do some kind of miracle. Jesus was considered a complete heretic. And from their viewpoint, the people on the ground looking at Jesus, their concept of God's power, or how God reveals himself, is by God bending the laws of physics, doing some kind of crazy miracle to prove to them that he's in Jesus, or Jesus is called by him. But no, that's not how God governs this world. That's not how he wants to govern this world. God's power that he governs this world with is with his love. How do we know that? Because we all want love at the end of the day. That's what we all seek. We seek that because God created us to be that, and he governs with love. So when Jesus was on the cross, he said, forgive them, Father, for they do not know what they're doing. And after his resurrection, he came to the disciples and said, no matter what happens, I'll always be with you until the end of the ages. With this love, that's what sparked Christianity. That's what motivated the early Christians to literally die for their faith under the Roman Empire. Even now, if you meet a Christian person, like evangelizing to you, they won't come up to you and say oh, by the way, there was this man 2,000 years ago, and he did some miracle. You have to believe that he did some miracles and he resurrected. And if you don't believe that, you're screwed for eternity. That's not the way they go about it, because that's not how they feel. What they'll say is, Jesus loved you so much that he willingly took the pain of dying on a cross to save your life, for you to come to know his love for you. It'll always be centered on love, because that's what God governs by. So I would say, even from the Christian perspective, it might be good to have an open mind about how Jesus will return. I know in the Bible it says Jesus will come supernaturally. It's his second advent. It says this understanding that a rapture, opening will appear in the sky, Jesus will levitate down, lift up his followers. This supernatural stuff is written in the Bible. And that's the common belief in Christianity. Because, the literal interpretation. But it might not be that way. God might not reveal what he wants to reveal to you by power, by physical power, miracles. He might reveal it to you by the presence of love. Let's even look at one last example of John the Baptist. You might not have ever heard of his name, but I think it's still interesting. John the Baptist had the mission of Elijah. Elijah was a prophet from before. He was supposed to pave the way for Jesus to come. But it wasn't obvious that he was Elijah. He came in the mission of Elijah, but it wasn't obvious. So when the church elders were like, yo, where's Elijah? If we're going to believe in Jesus, Elijah has to come. John the Baptist, are you Elijah? He says, no, I'm not Elijah. So what I'm essentially trying to say here is it was not obvious that he was in the mission of Elijah, because he didn't miraculously appear to be Elijah. He didn't look like Elijah of the past. Elijah went up, it says in the Bible, in a flaming chariot to the sky in heaven. The Jewish people, they thought he was going to come back like that. That's why in Passover, the celebration that the Jewish people hold, when they have dinner, they leave a glass of wine and their door open for Elijah to hopefully come back. They're still waiting for Elijah. But it was John the Baptist all along, because Elijah was not supposed to come back miraculously, but in mission. So in the same way, Jesus may not come back in this miraculous way, maybe even appearing the same way as a Jewish man, 33 years old. Maybe not. You might see him by the fruits of their life, fruits of his life, and the fruits of their love. So the couple takeaways that I wanted to share is that from our belief, from my belief, true parents, Reverend and Mrs. Moon, are the starting point of peace, because they've taken the responsibility to dedicate their lives to God and all mankind. And I think that's the greatest responsibility one can ever assume. They're God-chosen people who've come in which everyone can realize peace in their life, within themselves, and by attending Heavenly Parent in one family under God. And I think by following in their footsteps, learning more about them, learning more about the principles with which they teach and live by, I think each of us will be able to achieve a higher level of peace within our own life, grow towards the best version of ourselves, and share that gift to our family, friends, and the world that we want to impact. So we can also be starting points of peace, just like them. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. I already heard this before, so. What was God's original dream? If God is a parent, so that's a presupposition if we want to use logic. Presupposition is God is a parent. We can't know that for sure. But if we take that as fact, as in philosophy, they're called axioms. Like there's certain things in life that, or in philosophy, or even mathematics, that, like in geometry, for example, that's one thing I remember. Certain statements that you can't necessarily prove, but you assume it's true for the sake of a greater understanding. So if we take the axiom that God's a heavenly parent, then that means naturally, by the definition of what a parent means, it means that the dream of the parent is to create something, in this case children, that are equal to or better than itself. So thereby, God's dream would be one family, one human family. But because we're all immature, can we all acknowledge we're immature? Yeah, the whole world's immature. There's no mature person. So if everyone's immature, then it is impossible for a concept of an ideal family to manifest in the world. Why? Because for God's dream to be fulfilled, we have to be as mature as God is. We have to be able to give and receive love at the same level, if not more, that God is. So that's why in the Bible, in countless religions, there is no understanding of a family, or the concept of a savior being a parent. In the Jewish scriptures, partly inherited from Zoroastrianism, but also in their own scriptures, the Messiah is a king. And then in Christianity, when Jesus comes, he's just seen as a son. He died too early to even form a family of Mary, or to find this daughter of God like Sam mentioned. So even after Jesus came, the concept of a family, or even family salvation, like family as an ideal, was still not around. In Buddhism, it's all centered around the self, for example. And if you look in the Greek and the Roman gods, it's all about the individual being worthy in the sight of the gods. It's never about the family or the unit. It is the nation, but even when we talk about the Greek Empire, like, are we favored by the god? It really is the king favored by the gods. If the king's not favored by the gods, everything, it doesn't matter if the rest of the nation is. But this is the only perspective, the divine principle perspective, the teachings that Reverend and Mrs. Moon propagate. They're the only one I've ever found. I've studied some, not all, but I've studied a fair amount. It's the only teaching of philosophy or theology that ever talks about the family as the central unit. It's the only one. And that's why when Reverend Moon claims he's a second advent of Christ, actually what the more important claim is that he's saying he's a true father. He's standing as a model for good parenthood, good fatherhood. In the same way, Mother Moon is standing as a model for true motherhood. And so that's why I think, personally, it's a new truth. It's the only one that has the family. It's the only one that goes beyond a king or a son, or like a master-servant relationship, or like a royal relationship. Like God is like this king and the Messiah is some prince. And so I believe Reverend and Mrs. Moon have been the only figures I can find in history, and especially in the 20th century and beyond, that have attempted to model what an ideal family is, what an ideal parent is. And I think that's important because if we have a model of that, then that means there is a possibility to realize a dream of one. Anything else, I feel, at least in my experience and what I've investigated so far, doesn't reach that level of fulfilling God's dream. If, of course, the axiom is God is a heavenly parent. So that's something I'd like to invite everyone to consider and to, even study it. I could use a good study of the Black Book again. So if any of you want to do one with me, feel free. Or any of us, I'm sure. Yeah, that's one of the great things of CUB. We can study together, discuss, study other worldviews, and discuss those, like we talked about conscientiousness and Christianity in the previous talks. So
yeah, the last thing we wanted to do was share a short video of a few minutes that kind of detail Reverend and Mrs. Moon's life throughout their ministry. You guys see? Can you guys see? Can you turn off the light?
yes.
How do you turn it off? What? How do you turn it off? I turned it back on. Oh. Thank you much.
Theater style.
Yeah.
Alright, live stream. Time to get a front row seat.
You guys will also see his hug with Kim Il-sung, how he embraces him.
Race, religion, ethnicity, gender, and culture. He is perhaps the most misunderstood, misrepresented, maltreated, and maligned person on the face of the earth. But that only is the stuff that makes him love all the more. He loves his enemies. He lives for the sake of others. And no cost is too great in order to bring back the family of God. He has committed his life to restoring us to God's true love, God's true life, and true lineage, so that we look upon each other as brothers and sisters, one family under God.
These are marriage ceremonies to dedicate marriages to God. Hundreds of thousands of people here. family on their birthday. Right? You can turn the lights on. Ryan, can you turn it?